So let's get right after it. Back in 2012, President Obama signed into law the Faa Modernization Reformation Act. And in that act, Section 336, subsection C, defined the model aircraft as an unmanned aircraft that is capable of sustained flight in the atmosphere, flown within visual line of sight of the person operating the aircraft, and flown for hobby or recreational purposes, meaning no gain, no exchange of goods or services or currency or favors. Favors are a form of gain, so strictly for recreational purposes. If we fast forward to the Reauthorization Act of 2018 that was signed by President Trump back in October of 2018, it repealed Section 336 of the Modernization Reformation Act. Basically, the terminology model aircraft and all components contained therein are no longer. The terminology unmanned aircraft prevails. So, moving along, if we take a look at 302, there is now Section 349, the exception for limited recreational operations of unmanned aircraft. And the AMA worked very, very hard with the FAA and making sure that this was going to get written accordingly. From there, it got codified into the United States Code, and now becomes an enforceable law, and that took effect June 6th of 2019. From there, the FAA came out with an advisory circular, which simply mirrored or parroted the information contained within the code. And advisory circulars, for those who don't understand, are just simply advisory in nature. They are not regulation. So as far as modeling and recreational law, if you will, or code or regulation, well, there's no regulation. The FAA is just saying, hey, go look at the law. This is the law. So let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the advisory circular. 9157 Bravo is downloadable. You can search for it online and download a copy. But here's what it basically says. A person may operate a small unmanned aircraft without specific certification or operating authority from the FAA if the operation adheres to all of the following limitations. The UAS is flown strictly for recreational purposes. Operations are in accordance with a community-based organization's set of safety guidelines, such as the Academy of Model Aeronautics. The UAS is registered and marked accordingly, and you must maintain proof of registration and keep it readily available for the administrator or law enforcement. The UAS is flown within visual line of sight of the operator or a designated visual observer that's in constant communication with the operator. Small UAS flown in a manner that does not interfere with and gives way to manned aircraft. And to paraphrase, in certain classes of airspace, the operator obtains prior authorization from the administrator or designee before operating and complies with all airspace restrictions and prohibitions. And this is referring to basically Part 10741, which demands that a commercially licensed remote pilot obtain an authorization. And an authorization is in the form of kind of a combination of a flight plan and clearance that we obtain as manned aircraft operators. So what they're saying is that if you're operating in Class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or the lateral boundaries of an Echo airspace associated with an airport, you need to obtain a Lance authorization. And the Lance authorization has altitude restrictions, plain and simple. So they are now forcing recreational operators to comply with this. If you're in G airspace, then you're limited to 400 feet AGL, period. You don't need to get a Lance authorization. And again, item 7 is 10751. So they're really just, playing off of 107 regulations here. Item 8 is just like 10761. You got to pass an aeronautical knowledge and safety test and maintain proof of test passage. pretty interesting. Now they're forcing modelers to be compliant by demonstrating their knowledge. So the only real thing that identifies a recreational pilot is the fact that you're flying not for hire, no gain, and that you're part of a CBO, and everything else prevails. Item 3, if you notice, that's just 107.13. Item 4 is 107.31. Item 5 is 107.37. I mean, they're just taking a playbook right out of Part 107. So I find this a little distressing, but it was inevitable. They're now fully regulating recreational pilots. To look up the law and to read the law, there's the URL. It's in plain English. HR 302 is the Reauthorization Act of 2018. So it's readily available online, as is 9157 Bravo. As I demonstrate here with the sectional chart, the purple circle in the center is where our flying field is. And you'll see that it's located under the Class Charlie shelf, which begins at 1,500 feet MSL. The fuzzy side of magenta indicates that Class Echo airspace begins at 700 feet AGL. We're in Class G airspace because everything below that 700-foot fuzzy magenta designation is Class G airspace from the surface up to 700 feet AGL. So, and we're outside the delta of Farmingdale, which clearly puts us in Class G airspace. Ergo, we are limited to 400 feet AGL. There's no possibility for filing a waiver where recreational in nature, and waiver process pertains to Part 107 operators. Under Part 101, it was saying that if you fly within, really, if you read Part 101, it was simply reiterating a lot of what's already been designated in Part 107, and Part 107 deprecates the need for notifying an operator within 5 miles of an operating airport. Furthermore, the AMA regulations that stipulate that if you're within 3 miles of an operating airport, you're to keep it at 400 feet or below, and if you're within 5 miles of an operating airport, then you need to let them know. And you just cannot accomplish this. Hence the reason for the law and for making people comply with the Lance authorization. Lance is designed, by definition, to cut down on the telephone calls and the interaction between the towers. And yes, there are some designated AMA flying fields that are operating within certain airspace. As an example, the Walt Whitman Flyers are right in the Delta, and by way of Lance, believe it or not, their letter of authorization states that their ceiling is at 200 feet AGL if they want to fly with a boundary of 660 feet. So it's very, very upsetting, I think, for the Whitman Flyers, but we're not, we're nowhere near, in their shape. We're basically in Class G, and our flight altitude limit is 400 feet AGL. To learn more about all of this stuff, you can go online to faa.gov/UAS. You can read all about recreational flyers, certification for remote pilots on the commercial side. Everything is there online, and that's about it. So that's all I got. Thank you for listening.